Hello, everybody. It is Saturday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. I am Chris Weave. I have with me Lissa Beck, as always, and my friend Peter Gold. I'll explain to you in just a second while he's here. I do not have Pat here tonight because Pat is actually homesick. He was originally supposed to not be here because he was going to be traveling for work, but instead he's homesick. So let's start off. Lissa, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Also, hey, Chris, happy birthday.
So for what it's worth, Right Sublet already noticed that and said something in the comments about it. So I was expecting other people to say it. So technically my birthday is indeed tomorrow. It's not actually tonight. But thank you very much for the happy birthday wishes from everybody. But you know how I'm going to celebrate my birthday?
Sleeping in?
I'm going to celebrate my birthday by not speaking for my employer. So, which is how I usually celebrate my birthday and every other day. So, Peter, would you be willing to celebrate my birthday by not speaking for your employer?
Definitely.
Cool.
Definitely.
All right. So, public affairs people everywhere, take note. None of us are speaking for our employers. So, Lissa, I think everybody deserves to see this. Do you still have the trident handy?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, grab the trident. Yeah. So earlier, Lissa had to close her door, I guess, and she used the trident to do it remotely. So
Kira figured out how. So my cats are smart as hell. So both of the cats actually know how to open the door to get into the room. Because the foundation is a little wonky, so all they have to do is pop up and push the door. So if it's all the way closed, I have absolutely no privacy unless both the cats are in the room. But Kira figured out the scratch pad that I have on the door handle. If she pops up and gets her claws in it and yanks, she can pull the door open. And that's what happened.
I had a house that had lever door handles, and the one cat, my ex-wife's original plan was it had this fairly elaborate master bedroom suite with a loft that overlooked the main bedroom and a huge bathroom and stuff. And it was reasonable to think that we could just keep the cats in this area because that's where our TV was. We were going to be spending a lot of time up there in that area. And so plan A was to not have the cats throughout the house, but Rusty wasn't having any of that. And Rusty was a very smart cat. And he was about 12 hours away he had figured out that the handle was important. And he hadn't quite gotten to the point where he could do that, but he was working on it, and we finally just gave up. So also, my brother Delon,
why don't you have a trident? No, I was filming TikTok content using it. One of my D&D characters is a Triton warlock, but a lot of my D&D characters actually use tridents. So when you've got like 4 different characters that you cosplay for content that use a trident, you get a fucking trident.
That works.
I do have an actual metal one on my wish list, I think, but that's like $150 plus, shipping and whatnot. That was like $15-20, and that's including shipping.
Yeah, and the other thing about metal stuff is that, if you drop it, it'll leave a dent. So there's something to be
true, but authenticity it just looks cooler.
Depends how far you drop it, how big a dent you get.
It's true.
So Wright just made a nuclear weapons joke, so that was good. I like that. That's a good one.
Yes, tridents are us. That is definitely where you get a trident these days. Tridents are us.
So thank you, TJ, for the birthday wishes. So in any event, Peter, what have you been up to?
Working some stuff for TRMN's Merchant Marine division or branch. Getting ready to get rid of my current ship and hopefully then move on to a different one.
So let's dial back for a second and unpack that. So Peter is a member of the Royal Manticore Navy, which is the Honor Harrington fan club. In fact, he is the founder of the Merchant Marine branch of the Honor Harrington fan club because he is, wait for it, a merchant mariner in his day job. He is the chief engineer aboard. Do they call it chief engineer or do they just say engineer?
Chief engineer.
Okay.
But when my last ship that you saw me on went away, the next job available was his first assistant.
Oh, so you're a first assistant now.
Yep. Still hold the license, but no job for it at the moment.
You know, it's funny how that stuff works. The brother of one of my old colleagues up in Newport, you know, like one time he serves as the master of the ship, and the next time he's the first mate. And it's just like he got hired to be the master for one period, and the next time he wasn't. So. Yep. So it's definitely, for those with military experience, it's a little bit different in the Merchant Marine. So in any event, as Peter was saying, he's on a ship that's about to be, do they call it decommissioning?
Yes. Partially because it's a government-owned ship.
Okay. So, I previously have toured his last ship before it was decommissioned, and actually on the list of things to do at some point is, in fact, we were talking about this earlier. I've got 114 pictures I took on that ship, including pictures inside the lifeboat and, you know, all throughout the ship, etc. And so basically what we're going to do is basically a two-part thing, where the first part we're going to talk about, today's part is going to be about trade in the Honorverse. We're going to sort of talk about that stuff. And then we're going to talk at some other time, we're going to go through those pictures. And, you know, okay, so is it Starfleet? No. Is it tactical? No. But it is about maritime power. And we can assume that in Star Trek and most other science fiction out there, that there's something that looks like maritime power. And if you go back and you read, for instance, Alfred Thayer Mahan or Julian Corbett or any of the other ones, they will tell you that the core of maritime power, the Navy is nice to have, but the core of maritime power is your ability to conduct trade through your merchant marine. Yeah, and you know, Mahan is known for his love of decisive battle, but if you actually read the book, which admittedly is tough to do because he writes in this weird style that I'm sure made sense in 1895, but to a modern English speaker, the sentence construction is weird and stuff like that. I tried listening to the audiobook one time and it's impenetrable as an audiobook. But in any event, if you actually read it carefully, you'll see that he says it's really all about maritime trade. You got to protect maritime trade. And the best way to protect maritime trade is to go and whale on the other guy's battle fleet so that his battle fleet can't get in the way. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. First,
you know, I can't fault it.
Yeah. So we're gonna have a little bit of a conversation about what a trade ship or what a ro-ro ship looks like. Now, the stuff that Peter's on is he's ships that are owned by the United States Navy that are run by private merchant mariners, a contract for the United States Navy, and they're held in reserve so that if, like, we need to send an armored vehicle division, we've got ships ready to ship it in an emergency. And so that was one of the things that was really cool about it, is we were on this big ship and it's empty, so you could see everything because there wasn't stuff in the way. You could see all the handling gear and all the rest of it. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to start with I'm going to do a couple of slides myself, and then I'm going to turn it over to Peter, and he's going to talk about trade in the Honorverse. So you've all seen this before. Click on the right one. Okay, these are still pretty much the same thing I said before. Now, actually, what I should have deleted the survey because we're done with the survey. I've actually deleted my SurveyMonkey account, and I'll explain that in the next slide. But that's where we are right now. So we're going to talk about the survey results, and we're going to talk about trade in the Honorverse. And then when we get to trade in the Honorverse, I'll turn it over to Peter. Okay, the survey is officially closed. Turns out SurveyMonkey has this undocumented feature for the free account, and that is you can only actually get 10 survey respondents. There were 19 respondents, but I could only see the data for 10. I sort of sent them a nasty grab. It's like, okay, I get it. I'm not a paying customer, but you know, I sort of figured that the free account was to try to convince me to be a paying customer. And guess what? You did not convince me to be a paying customer by not showing me all the data. I mean, a survey where you can only look at 10 respondents, why even bother? Why even bother? Okay, so I could only see 10 respondents. So this is what I got out of the 10 respondents.
Chris, for next time, Google Sheets.
Yeah, I'm going to do something else. And the other thing is SurveyMonkey was actually harder to use than it should have been for something that was designed to do surveys. And I thought about upgrading it, but the minimum upgrade is $25 per user per month, 3 user minimum. So in other words, $75 a month. It wasn't worth $75 to see the other 9 respondents. So here's what we got. The first question was just to basically see if there was anything that was a non-starter for people. And I'm going to interpret Space Above and Beyond and the Orville as kind of non-starters. The Orville doesn't surprise me. Space Above and Beyond does a little bit, and that's actually kind of where Pat and I were thinking that we were going to start, just because it's a very short series. I'm going to get together with Pat, and we're going to talk about where we should start. But it looks like, you know, a lot of you are willing to participate in Battlestar Galactica. So there's in the Star Trek movies. So that sounds like that would be might be a pretty good starting point. When you go down to the next one, you'll see that there's one weird result. The second question is really sort of the money question, I think. Which 3 options are you most interested in as the starting point? I find it funny that Babylon 5 as a starting point scored higher than I would be willing to watch Babylon 5, which doesn't seem to make sense to me, which makes me wonder about how SurveyMonkey was picking the 10 people to show me the data. It makes me wonder if maybe the 10 people it showed me for question 1 and the 10 people it showed me for question 2 weren't the same 10 people. I don't know, though. But it looks like we'll probably start with Babylon 5 or Battlestar Galactica. They both have the disadvantage of being long shows, but they have the advantage of both being very good shows. Babylon 5 there's long stretches where it doesn't really have a whole lot of space combat in it. So we might end up doing longer blocks of episodes when we do Babylon 5. I'm going to have to sit down and talk it over with Pat. We'll figure it out. But that's the data so far. It's pretty clear to me that the Orville is not something that people are interested in. I was a little surprised that people didn't want to start with the Star Trek movies as the starting point, but I'm actually pleased about that, because I'm nowhere near as big a fan of the Star Trek movies as some other people are. I really think that Star Trek was at its best in the short form. So we'll probably end up starting in Babylon 5 or Battlestar Galactica, or maybe something like TNG. But Pat and I will go. We've gotten some feedback from you guys. We'll go and take a look at it. There's Wright says he'd be personally perfectly happy to hear Space Above and Beyond. We might still start with that, because I think, if I remember correctly, that show is only like 15 episodes, and we might be able to polish it off in just a couple of episodes of Starfleet Tactical, and so it might make sense to actually start with it. We're going to think about that. But in any event, that's where we're at. So now I'm going to stop that share. I'm going to go and share the other presentation. And now I'm going to turn it over to you, Peter.
Okay. Hi, I'm Pete Gold, graduate of one of the state maritime academies. I've been working in the maritime industry for about 40 years on merchant ships of all sizes, and both coastwise and international. Member of BU9, member of the Royal Manicoran Navy for past 6 years. So next slide, please. Yep. All right. So this presentation will look at trade in the Honorverse circa 1924 post-diaspora. This will cover the types of ships in use, the types of trade, the economics of interstellar shipping industry, what is traded and why it's traded rather than being produced locally. So we're getting more than just ships and trade. We're getting some of the bigger economics. Also look at some of the major differences and similarities between interstellar commerce in the Honorverse at the time of Honor Harrington and the real world industry. Also some comparisons with a couple of shout outs to Nathan Lowell's books for his Solar Clipper series, Quarter Share being the first book. Some examples drawn from there. May work in some stuff from Cedar Sanderson. I gave her the presentation last week at a science fiction convention, so expect to see some of this information show up in her next couple of books. So, first item is a couple of definitions. Next slide. So, TEU, that's a 20-foot equivalent unit. That's 39 cubic meters. That is the standard size shipping container, or that's how it's measured. Most of the ones you'll actually see on the ship are 40 footers, but they're 2 TEUs. Master is the legal term for the captain of any merchant vessel, big or small. They're the master in terms of for legal purposes. Normally called captain when you're actually talking to them. ISC is an Honorverse term for interstellar shipping container, and ISC has planetary shipping containers or PSCs inside. We'll cover that as we go through. Next. Okay. Merchant ships in the Honorverse can be divided roughly into 4 primary types of numbers of each type. These are couriers, freighters, passenger liners, and passenger freighters, which is a combo. Courier boats are the messengers and carry data such as banking information, messages, news, and record entertainment. Couriers are built with both high acceleration and close to a military-grade hyperdrive, so they can travel in the upper bands of hyperspace within the Honorverse. Most couriers have the ability to carry small amounts of physical cargo and a few passengers. Physical cargo and passengers are of course, premium services and charged accordingly. You really want to get somewhere fast, you grab a courier. You're going to pay for it, though. There is no modern, real-world civilian version of a courier. The closest would have been the liners that got a subsidy to carry mail along with passengers and general cargo from roughly the 1830s to World War II or so. Next slide. Passenger liners carry passengers, just like it says, and very small amounts of cargo. In the Honorverse, load ranges of 1,000 to 10,000 people, depending upon the ship, type of route. They're for long distance travel, mostly. The only Canon example mentioned in the books is the Atlas class Artemis that carried around 5,000 people. Next slide. Okay, so a passenger liner will run on a regular route and a schedule. While there's significant entertainment on board, the primary goal is moving people from one planet to another rather than as a vacation option in and of themselves. This is more in line with pre-1950s, 1960s ships rather than your modern cruise ships operating out of Miami, Florida. A passenger liner will stop at a given planet, usually for only a few days, rather than stop for a sufficient time to let passengers actually explore the sites. Passengers can arrange to get off and catch the next vessel, probably, though. Pictured, the Empress of Australia, launched 1919, just under 22,000 tons, 187 meters long, 400 first class passengers, 150 tourist class, 635 third class passengers, 520 officers and crew. So a lot of people, a lot of passengers, a lot of crew. Next slide.
If I can jump in for just a second, I think it's important to emphasize to everybody that a passenger liner is not a cruise ship, and a cruise ship is not a passenger liner. A cruise ship is Disneyland at sea. A passenger liner is much closer to being an airplane than it is to being a cruise ship.
Yeah, you're going to have a lot more space available because it is still a ship.
Yeah.
But
it's really about moving people from point A to point B. Some of those people get moved very luxuriously, some of them don't, and they all have to be entertained to some degree or another. But it's not about just, going, no passenger liner would leave port, go out, tool around for a little bit, and then come back to the same port.
No. Yeah, if you take a look at one of the Titanic movies, they show a scene where all the steerage class passengers are drinking at the bar. That's the limits of their entertainment. They have to bring their own musical instruments to entertain themselves. So on the roughly 1 week, what's supposed to be a 1 week trip. So hang on 1 second.
I detect that Peter's roommates just got home. So while Peter is away.
Oh, wait, maybe he's back.
I'm back. My roommates decided to blast the movie they're watching.
Okay.
Yeah. So next up is the combination passenger freighter. They carry significant amounts of cargo along with a few hundred passengers. Common in the Honorverse, they'd be common in the Verge, where the number of passengers is relatively low, but higher than the dozen or so that could be carried on a regular freighter, at least based on some real-world numbers. These are similar to the ships of the 20th century Pacific trade, prior to the introduction of the jumbo jet. Not enough passengers to have a lot of large dedicated passenger ships, but too many passengers to put on at 12 at a time on freighters. In the Honorverse, probably in the medium-sized freighter range of 4 to 6 million tons. Next slide. Picture the American President lines, President Cleveland, roughly 1947, 579 passengers, 5,500 cubic meters of cargo, which would be about 140 TEU. So more passengers than cargo, but still not a lot. We're also talking pre-containerization, and you want to keep the ship moving. So passengers pay more. Next slide. Yeah, freighters. Freighters carry goods from world to world. They're the backbone of the interstellar economy. A freighter is any vessel designed for carrying freight, but the differences in type of freight will have led to a dizzying array of freighter types. These include tankers, bulkers, and container ships. Pictured is a Maersk Line container ship. This is the Emma Maersk as of 2006, was one of the bigger ones, if not the biggest at the time. They're the most numerous type of Honorverse freighter, with a small portion of those being the heavy lift that were mentioned in one of the later novels, designed to carry the Rhino class interstellar shipping container or larger in addition to the normal interstellar container. Picture, like I said, the Emma Maersk, just under 400 meters, capacity little under 15,000 TEUs, 171,000 gross tons. For comparison, a Nimitz class aircraft carrier is 90,000 tons. Next slide. This is a bulker. They're designed to carry ore and similar dry cargo that can be poured into a cargo hold that is not affected by vacuum. Real world, you don't have to worry about the vacuum part, obviously. Cargo holds are open to space for the Honorverse when loading, and is loaded with no packaging or other containment from the hold of the ship. Modern day versions carry ore, coal, limestone, and similar. This type should not be confused with break bulk ships, which carry large holds of palletized cargo. In the modern world, break bulk ships have been primarily replaced by container ships. In the Honorverse, they may never have existed except in very specialized circumstances, if even then. Picture the Great Aspiration, 230 meters roughly, 93,000 tons. It's considered Aframax size. We don't have any artwork for an Honorverse version. Next slide. This is a tanker designed to carry large quantities of liquid gases, or in the Honorverse, dry bulk such as grains that can flow into or out of the ship and are affected by vacuum. In the Honorverse, the cargo holds are sealed except for the hose or similar that is attached and used to load the cargo. Pictured is the Stena Superior, a Suezmax tanker. So it's not the largest type. It can still fit through the Suez Canal. Again, no artwork, but we do have one known class of tanker, the Weston class. It's a Grayson design initially built in that system. Next slide. Next up is heavy lift. Relatively few of these in the real world. Pictured is the Blue Marlin, carrying the USS Cole, which is a 500-foot long frigate, Chris, or destroyer?
Destroyer, guided missile destroyer.
Okay, yeah. These are for cargoes where the individual items are too large for a shipping container, including too large for the Rhinos. Examples in the Honorverse could be a pair of rolling class DD could fit into the cargo hold of a large one. In the storyline, they were carried on a military-owned and operated vessel, but the principle image is the same. Again, no artwork for the Honorverse versions. So this is, next slide, sorry. This is a typical breakbulk ship, circa 1940 to roughly 1970. This is the SS Maple Cove, built 1946, a little over 9,800 gross tons, about 145 meters. When I said we probably didn't have breakbulk, next slide, please. This is why. This is a picture of cargo being loaded on a breakbulk ship, probably in the 1950s, maybe World War II. You're not going to see this. Even a 1,000,000-ton ship, which is a small Honorverse ship, you're not going to load individual pallets. As you can see, that's about 10 boxes, and you can see a human for size. Yeah, there's just not going to be, you'd be months trying to load a Honorverse ship.
I can jump in for a second.
Yep.
So I had a slide on my other's presentation that I forgot to show you all. It's got a couple of books on it. One of which is a book called 90% of Everything by somebody named Rose Brown, if I remember correctly.
Rose George lives in the
Rose
UK.
George. Yes. Yep. And then the other book is Mark Levinson's The Box. And it's the story of container shipping. And it's in the second edition of it is the one that I read. Peter and I have talked about this a lot, and I think I've mentioned it to the rest of you also, but that was a while ago back in talking about the interstellar shipping container and the rotary container ship presentation that I did, 40 episodes ago. But one of the things that Levinson talks about in The Box is that when a breakbulk ship like this shows up, it could take, they don't quite know how long it's going to take to unload it. They know it's going to be like, a week, 6 to 10 days. And you have to have stevedores down in the hold. And there's all sorts of stuff with, the union and how hard the stevedores are going to work, et cetera, et cetera. That shouldn't be interpreted as an anti-union comment. It should more be interpreted as there's a whole bunch of interesting politics that would take place on the waterfront. And some ships would get loaded faster and some would get loaded slower. And to some degree, that was who was willing to pay the bribes. And you could never really sort of figure out, you never knew how long it was going to take your ship to get unloaded. And you'll note, those boxes didn't just jump off of the stack onto that platform that's being lifted. And when that platform is put on shore, they're not just going to jump off of the platform and be put on the truck. And when the truck gets to the warehouse, they're not just going to jump off of the truck. Every time you do that, you got a dude who's got to pick it up and carry it. And every one of those dudes is going to get paid. And every one of those dudes adds time and money, et cetera, to it, which is why container shipping was such a huge deal, because it went from I take a week to unload a relatively small ship like this to all I need is one guy in a crane, and he takes it off the ship and puts it onto a semi truck that takes it over to someplace else. They take it off the semi truck and put it onto a train, and it's heading out of the yard, maybe heading off to its final destination. And so that Suezmax ship that Peter showed the other day, this thing will take a week to unload. That Suezmax ship that he showed in an earlier slide is what, 10 times the size? They'll unload it in about 5 or 6 hours. And they'll load it again, and it'll be ready to sail. It'll be in port for like 12 hours and then it'll be sailing again, as opposed to, I think we'll leave in about a week-ish, maybe. Yeah. So time is money.
Yeah. Breakbulk ships could spend 3 weeks in port. I think a friend of mine, they were unloading stuff in Leningrad. It was Leningrad at the time. It's that long ago. And then reloading timber. Birch mostly, and they spent 3 weeks there waiting, sitting.
I can believe it.
Yeah.
TJ points out breakbulk is subject to a lot of theft. Yeah, sometimes that TV falls off a truck, sometimes it'd fall off a ship.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to steal something when everything's locked in a container.
Yeah. Also, with less people handling it, you can control where people actually handle the goods. They may take the container to a warehouse only a few miles away to repackage it, but they're more likely to have a much more controlled environment when they do it there than when they're trying to do it on a ship.
Yeah.
So, they also palletize stuff now that they didn't used to do. You also don't have to worry about stowage as much because on a breakbulk ship, they are trying to wedge it in both as much as they can and make sure that as the ship rolls, it doesn't get damaged.
Tetris is easier when all the pieces look exactly the same.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So for somebody who wants to try and figure out how much space get an idea of one of those boxes in the photo, and then convert that over to a Honorverse ship. Measure the size of your room to get cubic feet. Divide that by 100 to get your modern gross tons. Draw a comparison between the number of rooms and the 1 to 8 million tons of cargo. All right. You also have stacking issues. An old breakbulk ship might have had a cargo hold that was 20 feet deep, followed by an 8-foot level. You've had portable decking you could install. If you went with an Honorverse ship, you're looking at between 30 and 60 decks to be loaded. So that's a 45-story building to be filled up by hand with boxes that size. All right. Even if you didn't have to worry, even if you turned the grav plates off, that's still a lot of manhandling. All right. Next slide, please. All right. So merchant ship sizes. We got couriers. They're in the 40 to 60,000 ton range. We see similar versions as the private transport, such as Honor's Starfalcon. Freighters, because of the size of the containers and length beam ratios required for the Honorverse to work, they tend to be in 3 different sizes. Heavy freighters are 6 to 8.5 million. They're the giants. They're going to run on fixed routes between systems that have both a lot of incoming and outgoing cargo. They'll mostly move it between large cargo handling hubs, Manticore Junction being one such. Cargo would come from the inner part of the Solarian League, be brought to Manticore, and then dispersed medium freighters that travel through the other neck side. Next slide, please. So here we have a couple of comparisons. Hopefully you can see it. We have the Halesoic, which is a 1,000,000-tonner, and the Caravan class from one of the Honorverse novels, where Honor takes over to Silesia as a Q ship. That's supposedly 8 million tons, roughly. So medium freighters are 4 to 6 million. They are actually the most common size, big enough to carry a profitable cargo along a route that has many stops. Each stop might want a small amount of cargo and only have a small amount of cargo to send onwards. Yet when ships are moving cargo between ports, when they pull into port A, they're not going to unload everything they have, reload all new cargo to carry to B, unless you're dealing with something going between, say, Manticore and Beowulf, where somebody's just trying to cheat on the toll cost by using a Manticore ship. You load some cargo, you go to your next spot, offload some, reload some more. So light freighters are in the 1 to 2 million tons, like the Halesoic. They tend to be older ships, and they tend to pick up the oddball cargo, whether on speculation or direct charter, to deliver to a given world. Next slide, please. All right. So this is the Caravan type. A little bit data there. 1,074 by 208 by 240 meters, 7.3 million tons for the Caravan. Each square is pictured is assumed to be an interplanetary shipping container. Estimated cargo capacity between 350,000 and 900,000 TEUs. The Ever Given, the ship that launched 1,000 memes last year by blocking the Suez Canal, was 20,000 containers, TEUs. So we're talking 15 times as much. All right, so this is a comparison between a real-world E-class, the Emma class container, and a Travis Long era. Even the Travis Long era ships, which were small by Honorverse era standards, are much bigger. Next slide. Another comparison photo. Maersk E-class at the bottom. At 397 meters, 171,000 tons. Halley Soley from Torch of Freedom at 1 million. Travis Long, and then the Caravan at 7.3 million. If I was to have gotten a picture of the Nimitz, it would be about a little under half the size of the Emma Maersk at the very bottom. Next slide. So these are the containers that we're talking about. They carry the Interstellar Shipping Container, or ISC. It's 28 meters by 14 meters by 14 meters. It carries 36 planetary shipping containers. PSC are designed to be unloaded from the interstellar container and distributed to a final destination. PSC is 12.9 by 2.8 by 2.8. There's also the Rhino heavy lift container mentioned in I think it's Uncompromising Honor. But you have to have specific slots in your ship to carry those. They are oversized. But an oversized slot can carry an ISC or a couple of ISCs at once. Next. So, types of trade. Next ship. Next slide. So we have liner service, tramp service, own shipping, which is in quotes because it's not really a fully official term, and speculative. Real-world shipping trade since roughly the mid-1800s has traditionally been broken down into tramp and liner services and what Jansen and Schneerson refer to as own shipping. They didn't coin the term until 1987, but the actual practice is much older. The same breakdown applies to the Honorverse by the time of Honor Harrington. Honorverse offers a fourth type of trade that doesn't have a modern equivalent. That is the option for a ship's master to buy cargo, buy the actual goods, on speculation for delivery at a place of their choosing. This was common during the Travis era, but has become less so. Some tramps on the verge might still do it, especially if they don't have any other cargo and can get it cheap. It's also a way to get around the lack of currency. I bring a bunch of goods and you want to buy them. We basically barter. Okay, so next slide. So this is a liner route. This is the Asia-Europe, I believe it's Maersk. Photos actually from TKM Global. So liner service is a type of trade where the ships travel on a fixed route and schedule as much as possible. The Great Pacific Traffic Jam has thrown a monkey wrench into scheduling with that. All those ships sitting off the port of Long Beach. So the ships sail in accordance with a well-established, guaranteed, well, supposedly guaranteed, and published schedules from a defined harbor to one or more several other harbors. Liner trade is mainly to carry small lots of goods from numerous customers. The shippers who use this service commonly transport part cargo load on those vessels, handling only part of the vessel space. Ships involved are owned by the shipping company or on long-term leasing to the company. Next slide. Liner ships will also call upon smaller ports that are along their liner route if there is what is referred to as sufficient inducement. There has to be a minimum quantity of cargo or freight required by a shipping line to make it worthwhile to divert to a particular port of loading or discharging. They call that an inducement cargo or the inducement rate. A shipper wanting a liner to stop at their planet would send a message to the closest star system that is a regular liner stop. They would say, indicate how much cargo, what they'd be willing to pay, and where it's bound. The ship would then divert to them based upon the terms of the message. They may find that they have to wait a while. There's more money that's not worthwhile, and when a courier comes back after a few weeks, or they have instructions to up the diversion price, the inducement rate. Next slide, please. Oh, so the flag with the black ball was the flag for the black ball line. Started in 1818, but didn't become common until the mid-1800s with the widespread development of steam. Black ball line left New York on the same day of each month and carried passengers, mail, and general freight. All right, so here we have the SS Clark. She's a bulker. She's loading ore at the Great Lakes. So if liner services are regularly scheduled like airlines, a tramp service is a type of trade where the ships are hired under various terms to carry specific cargo, or the ship's master picks up what cargo is available at that planet that needs moving. So this ship could be loading ore up in the upper Great Lakes, and somebody says, I need ore in Detroit this week. Somebody else says, when they go back, send them up there, bring it down to Gary, Indiana Harbor, or someplace else. They generally won't mix cargo types for bulkers because of the cost of cleaning out the cargo hold hoppers between voyages. You really don't want to have rice mixed in with your coal or vice versa. All right.
So just to jump in very quickly, there's a merchant mariner on YouTube whose name escapes me right now, but his channel is like Chief Engineer such and such. It's like a Filipino name or something.
Oh, Chief Mako. He's Chief Mate.
Yeah, Chief Mako. You're right. He was a chief mate, not a chief engineer. He does. He's got an episode where he specifically, the ship he was on was they were going to take like a cargo of wheat or corn or something, and they had to clean out the hold and get inspected that they were now, the hold was good for food grade. And he showed exactly how much effort it took to clean out the hold from whatever they were carrying previously. And there was a lot of water involved.
Yes. And depending upon what your cargo is, that water could be hazmat. Okay. Yep. And even if it's not hazmat, you're probably not going to be able to just dump it over the side. You probably have to send it to a processing facility of some sort, unless you're able to do it in deep water. So you can, like, if you were carrying grain, you could flush the grain over the side while you're running empty to your next port. But you've got to be clean, and they're going to want to make sure it's really clean, especially if you're going from like ore to food.
Yeah.
A lot of work. Great Lakes, not going to happen. Your average trip is under a week, not enough time to do a thorough cleaning. So
Yeah, makes sense.
Yep. So we have 3 types of tramp charters: bareboat. Shipper hires the ship and has to supply the crews and bunkers. We also have time charter. The shipper hires the ship and the crew for a specified time and has control of where the ship goes. Probably not going to see a lot of that in the Honorverse, just because the control issues of, okay, if I've hired a ship, unless I'm going to ride it, I really can't do an awful lot, unless I'm going to send it on a specific route. We sort of can see that. So they'd be paying a per day fee plus bunkers and other costs. That may have been what the Mondragon was in On Basilisk Station. So she was a chartered ship, but she may have been a time charter. Voyage Charter. Ship's cargo space is bought by a shipper to move a certain cargo from point A to B, usually for one trip, but it could be more. We do see this in one of the later books where the ship pulls in to pick up basically this entire planet's output for 6 months. From the description and reading between the lines, the ship's hired to come in, take all of it, and deliver it somewhere. Not a regular route, because otherwise it'd probably be more than once every 6 months or a year. They probably wouldn't be taking that huge a cargo from one buyer or one seller. Okay. The other part is that you have a ship that could be hired in Manticore to bring starship components, say to Grayson. Once it discharges the cargo, the master will solicit new cargo. It will load as much as possible and take it where it's hired to go. This might be all to one system or to a variety of systems. The shipments will have to have held on to the goods until the ship comes in that's available. Might take weeks or months for something to leave a planet after it's produced, depending upon the planet's economy. Something coming out of Manticore, probably going to be able to move out pretty quickly to someplace else. Just an awful lot of ships coming back and forth. You might have to pay a lot. You're on a Verge world, you may not see very many ships that come by, unless you're dealing with a liner that's just going to go from planet to planet and pick up whatever happens to be there that week. All right, so next slide. It should be the BP one. Yep. So British Petroleum, it's their flag or their symbol. This is where the thing own shipping comes in. The shipping company owns the cargo, usually as part of a vertical monopoly. British Petroleum I think it still does have its own ships. They carry their own oil, their own gasoline. They move it back and forth. Shell, Texaco, Exxon, I think Exxon Valdez all had their own ships. Great Lakes had the same thing. The steel companies own the ships. Honorverse, maybe the Hotman cartel, but we actually don't have any text evidence for that. Okay, next, please.
If I can jump in for a second, 2 thoughts
Sure.
on that. One is, I don't think they carry gasoline because as a general rule, you only carry. So this is actually one of these things that's kind of interesting. If you read all sorts of World War II convoy stuff, you hear about tankers full of gasoline, and like you didn't want to serve on a tanker full of gasoline because like you're going to die. But they, after the war, they figured out, don't ship gasoline, ship crude oil, and use local refineries to make whatever you need, because crude oil is actually much safer to ship than gasoline is, and it's easier to ship raw crude oil than it is to ship refined products. You don't have to know the local market as much. You know they want oil. right? You don't have to know how much gasoline they want to make out of that. So that's one thing. The second thing is own shipping is sort of an interesting thing because while Exxon has its own tankers, I'm 95% sure that all of the oil companies these days have a separate company that owns the tankers. And, it may be a wholly owned subsidiary, but they play lots of, like, no oil tanker company ever made a profit ever. Because it's not in their best interest for them, for that part of the business to actually be profitable. So they have, Shell has shell companies that they use to not make a profit and to ship all that stuff. There's a very interesting book called, wait for it, The Petroleum Shipping Industry that I read some time ago. It's a little long in the tooth right now, but it talks about the history of petroleum shipping in the post-war era and all the games they play and everything else like that. So, all right.
Yeah. You have, if you own the ships and you own you're mining your own ore, you can play games with where the profit is on an accounting basis. So, all right. So fourth type is in the Honorverse. We don't see it in the real world now. Is speculative trade. It's one but it used to be common in the days of sail. In speculative trade, the master will buy a cargo in port rather than carry it on hire for someone else. The master will then carry it until they can sell it at a profit. This is feasible in the Honorverse due to the communications times and travel times, making it hard for shippers to know or advertise that small cargoes are available. If the planet isn't serviced by a liner, they generally have to wait for a ship to show up. Historical example was the China porcelain trade. American sea captains could buy Chinaware and be assured of selling it in the U.S. for a nice profit. This also seems to be a standard trope in a lot of science fiction, with the Witches of Keris series put out by Bain, written by Eric Flint, Dave Freer, as a typical example.
Yeah, you really see this all over science fiction. You see it in role-playing games. You see it in the Liaden series, and everybody and their brothers sort of seems to view this as how trade works, and it hasn't worked that way for a long time.
Yeah.
I do like the fact that there's an element of that in the Nathan Lowell books, but in the Nathan Lowell books, it's a very much of a, I wouldn't say it's a hobby amongst the crew, but because they actually do put some money into it, but it's really sort of it's more like training, and it's more like motivational things, as it's like people trying to make money on the side and getting them enthused about being traders, as opposed to just like, I'm just going to drive the ship from point A to point B. So.
Yep. That's one of the major subplots in the first three books with the flea market. The crew gets organized, and they're each buying, the crew members are buying a small amount, usually under 25 kilograms, I believe, of stuff, buying it on one planet and then selling it one or two stops later, all on their own, no real taxes involved. It's not going on the ship's manifest. If they're trying to sell it, and they get robbed, well, they've just lost everything. That's actually happened a couple of times in the books where the people have gotten robbed and lost everything. So. Yeah,
I can't recommend those Nathan Lowell books highly enough, and Peter's the guy who told me about them, and reminded me that I had not yet read them, and I really should. And that was they're fantastic. They're fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, the first volume is available from Audible for free, or at least it was last week. So you can try it out. I hope you like them. So, all right. So next slide. Oh, yeah. What cargo is carried? So far, we focused on how it happens. Let's spend some time thinking about why it happens. And to answer that question, we first need to talk about what trade is. In the Honorverse and most science fiction universes, any star system that has easy access to space can have orbital farms for food, moons and asteroid belts for many raw materials and manufacturing processes that can be put there without messing up the planet's surface. In theory, almost any system could theoretically be self-sufficient. So why do we have trade? Next slide. Trade happens when the cost of transporting the good, including the time as a cost, plus applicable financing is less than the cost of expanding local production. Next. So that gives us what they call comparative advantage. The concept that one location or group of people are better at making a particular product to trade with another group to get another product applies even when both locations are capable of making the products. The classic example is that both England and Portugal could produce cloth and wine, but England could make cloth more efficiently. So the English would sell cloth to Portugal and buy wine that's more expensive to produce in England. Next slide. So comparative advantage might be mitigated by the capital costs of making the tools and having techs to both run and maintain the tools. Applying comparative advantage across the entire globe, i.e. globalization, requires cheap shipping. In the real world, this came from containerization. The example from the book that we mentioned earlier, it was cheaper to make shoes in Norfolk, Virginia at a less efficient plant at higher unit costs than to ship them from Boston, where there was which was the shoe capital of the world at the time, due to cargo handling costs. The cost of loading and unloading, not the cost per mile of moving it via ship or train, was your controlling factor. Next slide. It doesn't apply just to manufactured goods, though. Raw materials, while less added value per ton, can be shipped to places where the material can be made into a wide variety of goods to be sold locally rather than guess at what the destination wants for goods. As Chris mentioned, it's often better, especially when you don't have communications. We'll ship crude oil and refine it locally with less hazard, and we can split it better into products that people want locally. You ship logs that can be made into chairs, tables, or housing. Lumber is a surer thing than shipping a bunch of chairs on speculation. Remember, in the Honorverse, knowledge of what the next planet wants is weeks to months old. I find out what I have on this planet, on planet A, and what planet B wants. The information I have from them is a few weeks to a few months old. So what do I buy? I buy or bring stuff that's either always in demand, such as under a contract, or can be made into goods locally. So next. And if the advantage is great enough, those finished products might be shipped back to the place from where the raw materials originated. Indeed, in the modern global economy, there might be several such shipments back and forth as raw materials become components, which become sub-assemblies, and then major assemblies, which are then finished goods. The question of where was that car built is a question that may not even make sense anymore, depending upon what you mean by built. One of the recent trade agreements that we did with Japan over steel imports was Japanese steel will get a a duty-free, tariff-free import status, but it's based only on steel that was poured from raw materials inside of Japan. They can't get semi-finished steel from, say, Korea or China, partially pour it into a better shape that would fit the U.S. market, such as reels of sheet metal, and send it to us duty-free. It has to have been poured from raw materials. So it's possible to differentiate, but you have to be very specific with what you're trying to ask. Next slide. So how does this apply to the Honorverse? So interstellar shipping per David is the cheapest form of shipping ever invented in a cost per distance sense. As Chris pointed out in a previous conversation with him, there are no $11 billion of wine. This is a setting where it's economical to ship dirt across interstellar distances. They will ship ice to Hoth to get the right kind of ice. Next, please. The economic impact of this, or the basis of it, is that we expect to have a low inflation environment, high capital costs, and for the Verge world, very importantly, political instability, at least some of which is generated by frontier security itself, to keep the worlds in check and to enable the transstellars to drain the economies of needed capital and foreign exchange. Next. So in faces of these forces, investing in a Verge world requires a high expected rate of return. In many cases, creating manufacturing isn't a profitable enough to justify the interest rates needed to create those investments. The risks of local rebels damaging your expensive factory or killing or kidnapping the specialized technicians needed to make it work also comes into play. Next. Likewise, humans on the Verge world are likely undereducated compared to the more developed worlds, and thus their ability to innovate is generally viewed as inferior within the Honorverse, especially in the case of world with a high level of prologue compared to one without. This imbalance leads to a comparative advantage, and given the hypothesized cheapness of building and maintaining a freighter compared to that of a factory, we can strongly divide the worlds into high capital and low capital worlds and expect trade between the two. The differences in available capital and its cost, the distance needed to travel, the education level of the society, and political stability all play into what cargoes are carried. Next, please. Maybe I missed a slide from the slide presentation. All right, so what kind of goods are carried? What kind of a cargo can you expect? So we have raw materials. Mining ore and other raw materials can be relatively low capital compared to high-tech factories. Plenty of places where it's cheaper to mine and ship the minimally processed material to another system for basic processing. The processed ore might be shipped to a third system to make finished goods. Within the Honorverse, nanotech is not just dump random material into a box and get what you want. The nano factories require very specific clean materials, hence moving raw materials from one cheap source to a higher capital world with the right equipment. This matches the colonial economic systems from history. The colonies would export lumber to Europe, and it would be turned into chairs back there, and then sent as chairs back to the colonies. Glass, similarly, among other things. Other items, next slide. Another possible cargo, food or unique natural products, such as plant or animals that are either only produced on a planet or that the quality is especially great due to where it's produced. Coffee, tea, grapes, wine, all very dependent upon the local environment. So Honorverse examples that we don't have in the in the real world would be Montana beef and Kodiak's Max pelts. Different wine and whiskeys. Also food to systems that don't want or aren't able to expend capital for orbital farms, such as a system that has a great mining potential but no habitable planet. I think we also see this in Nathan Lowell's world, where they've got some star systems that are, there is no habitable planet, it's just an asteroid belt that they're mining. So they have to import a good deal of food on the ships. Next slide, please. So another type of trade, it's not in goods, but sort of in people. Luxury vacations, or special or especially valuable educational opportunities. Planets that have great geography or historic cultural features that can make a multi-week voyage worthwhile for those that have the time to travel. Real world examples would have been South Pacific or Australia prior to World War II. Especially coming from the US, where you had to go by ship. Other examples was the 1960s, where college students could travel by cheap passenger ship to Europe and then hitchhike around Europe all summer, or maybe catch up a job here and there. The lucky ones could actually work their way across if they had what they call a Z card or Merchant Mariner's document. And, you know, oh yeah, we'll take somebody for half union wages, as long as they don't cut into anybody else's overtime. All right. Pictured is, well, we'll leave it at that. A friend of mine got it for me. Next slide, please. So we got basic manufactured goods. These are items that can be sold at any number of destinations with at least some profit and capital and scale, make it cheaper and easier to make in one system and sell in many less developed ones. Example from earlier was porcelain. China, U.S. would buy all the China porcelain. But the ship, when it left China, had no idea what port would have the best prices nor who would buy it. Even tea under East India Company, they come to London and they'd auction it off. They knew that eventually somebody would buy all of it. They weren't going to get stuck with it. All right. In the Honorverse, there must be goods that can be sold at almost any planet. What it is, we're not specifying, though. Next, please. Higher tech goods, items that a world cannot make. It could be lack of capital for the machines. It could be that the production requires technicians with sufficient skills that the planet doesn't have. Includes components for manufactured goods that the importing planet can't make, even if they can make the rest. So you might be importing the computer chips for your car in the real world, but you can make the body and the engine and assemble it. Or you can make some parts locally. So these include goods for core world's transstellar employees that locals can't afford, but are part of the perks for the off-world employees. Okay, next slide, please. We also have specialty goods. These are items that require either a lot of infrastructure to make or not very many will be used on the planet relative to the cost of a factory. An example during the Travis Long era were impeller nodes. Manticore was looking at being able to build most of the components for a starship, but didn't have the capability to build the nodes. They'd have to import those from Earth. Not enough capital to build a factory, not enough demand to making the factory worthwhile. By Honor Harrington's time, yeah, definitely changed. Next, please. All right, so yeah, modern container shipping versus the Honorverse. So this is compare contrast. Next, please. Communications. On modern Earth, you can order something today and they can put it on a container ship the next day in China. In the Honorverse, nope, you have to send a ship a week to a couple of months to order something, then pay for it, and then ship it. This is more along trade in the age of sail. Star systems, though, that have regular and frequent two-way communications can offer higher-end goods faster. You can order a case or pallet of a specific wine from another system and expect delivery in a few months. There will also be import stores that offer goods that are not commonly sold. A real-world example from the 1980s were the anime stores. There's only a few, and you got what they had. There was no Amazon or similar. Okay. Next. Autonomy of the master. The master can change the route to increase the profits in the Honorverse. The communication lag is so huge that they're very much on their own. They pull into a planet and somebody says, hey, we'll offer you this much to divert over here for a week and come back. It's up to them. They just have to know. They can accept cargo and contracts that change their route. They can buy cargo rather than just carry it on contract. There's actually a plot point in Nathan Lowell's Solar Clipper series along those lines. They take a priority cargo to a system that is outside the company's normal couple of routes. That's in Captain's Share. Next, please. Concept of just-in-time inventory. The idea of getting goods from out-system just in time is not going to happen unless you're dealing between, say, Manticore and Beowulf. Travel time is just too great to do it. While transport is cheap per ton mile, it still takes time, and you have to get to the other place to change your routing, what's being sent. You can have a steady flow of goods that have been arranged, but it's not going to be easily changed in terms of quantity, and frequency of delivery. At the planet-side level, it can look like just in time if large amounts of a common good are brought in by a major importer and then resold locally as needed. Next, please. Payments. Ships are going to have to carry some kind of large amount of cash to buy stuff, whether it's fuel, cash so that the seamen on board, the merchant, the spacers, can go ashore. Repairs, anything like that. They just can't go and wire the money on spec. So in the Honorverse books, they have Bank of Madrid chips. Bank of Madrid is one of the companies that issue these very secure chips that are worth a certain amount per chip. Liners may have a prearranged cargo payment that can be done by ledger entries. If you're dealing with a Hauptmann cartel that's running on this route and with half a dozen ships, yeah, you can get credit. They just send a message along the route or with a courier back to the home office. Expect to see starships to require payment in a widespread hard currency. Example being the Manticoran dollar, Solarian credit, etc. We do see an example in the Glenn Stewart Starship Mage Red Falcon books, where each star system has a certain amount of money on bank at other systems that their representative can spend, unless they can get approval from someplace else. Okay. Another alternative, especially on the Verge, is barter. The ship takes payment in cargo that they hope to sell at a future date. This is the own trading from earlier. But the ship's going to have a lot more cash available to make sure they can pay for stuff when they really need it. Next, please. Prearranged cargoes. A planet will have arranged with a specific ship under contract to visit a predetermined date to pick up either all the possible cargo or a long production of cargo. These could be seasonal items, or it could be that getting a ship to visit isn't worthwhile. It's sufficient inducement until a factory or planet has stuffed its warehouses full. Next, please. Lots of goods might not be available on a given planet at all times. Shipping time of goods and the time needed to order can make some items unavailable for months at a time, rather than having to wait a week for a restock. Unless it's the type of good that will require a steady supply, such as ore, there isn't going to be a pipeline of freighters with that cargo arriving every day or week. Next, please. So, similarities between the real world and the Honorverse and some of the economic stuff. Ships are large, ships are expensive. This is a riff off Chris's design notes for one of your other presentations with your ships will be big. Yep. Ships are large and capital intensive and require a capital intensive infrastructure to build. Not as much as capital as an advanced factory, but it's not a knock one together on the beach like colonial New England was. The infrastructure to load and unload the largest and most efficient ships could also require specialized infrastructure. Ships that are dealing with the Verge may have cargo shuttles that they carry themselves, take longer to load and unload, going to cost more money, no big deal there, but they don't have to have any specialized infrastructure necessarily in orbit. Flip side is that ships can be moved to a different route easily, unlike a factory in orbit or on a planet. A lot harder to destroy a ship when it's not there, or if it's not there, than a factory that can be held hostage by a rebel group. Next, please. Brokerages. Both real world and the Honorverse are going to rely heavily on cargo brokers. The brokers gather up cargo from the hinterland of the port, which is the area, will be the entire star system probably, and arrange for ships to move it to the appropriate destination. The brokers will consolidate cargoes for liners and also have the contracts and contacts for sudden or large loads of cargo going to unusual places. This is still very much you need to know who's on the other end in order to figure out who you've got to contact. So Rolodexes, or the Honorverse equivalent, are going to become important for traders. Next, please. High fixed costs. The shipping industry is an industry with high fixed costs. Ships' and port infrastructure cost a lot of money, which we already mentioned. Ships, they won't going to have a lot of extra ships on a route because those cost money. They want their ships as fully loaded as possible and to do so with as few stops as possible. Short-term trade increases, so we know that there's going to be something happening for the next few months. You either get a tramp ship in there, or you charter another ship from the tramp trade and run it yourself. Next, please. Key points about general shipping economics. Next page. All right, ships must keep moving. Ships only make money when moving. Loading, unloading takes time. Now, containers take a lot less time than break bulk, but still time. We covered that earlier. When loading and discharge takes extra time, the ship or the cargo facility is called what they call demurrage. That's the money paid by one party to another for failing to complete loading or discharging within the time allowed in the contract. It's usually an amount per day or per hour, and depends upon whose fault it is for why you weren't able to move. I was on a ship up on the Great Lakes, and we were charging $1,000 an hour if the terminal couldn't load us in something like 8 hours. So it's $1,000 an hour after that. They had a lot of breakdowns, cost them a lot of money. Okay. We would have had to pay it if we were short a crewman, such as they were coming in. You couldn't leave the ship to go on vacation until your relief was actually on board. And in one case, you had to make sure that they hadn't forgotten their documents at home. So they'd done that before, and that was embarrassing. Next, please. You have docking and pilotage fees, junction fees. Dropping into a star system at least costs time, maybe money in terms of fees if they try and charge them before to find out what's there. Your ships won't divert because of the time. On the off chance of cargo, shipping intelligence becomes important. Ship needs to know what planets are not far off the route have cargo and how much. Next. Sort of covered this already. Cargo handling costs money. Chris talked about this a lot with every time you pick up that box, you're paying somebody to do it. You're going to have a hub and spoke system most likely. It's easier to unload it in Manticore and split it between each of the junctions into smaller ships as need be. The cost of loading and unloading a cargo in the break bulk era in the United States was sometimes up to 70% of the value of the cargo. Essentially a tariff imposed by the fact that you had to do it by hand. Next, please. All right. It is the cheapest per mile in the Honorverse, but that might not be the best measure for driving trade. There's still the issue of time needed to move the stuff. So if you've got to wait 6 months, you got to weigh that against, even though it's dirt cheap to move 8 million tons of cargo. Next, please. Moving stuff is valueless if there's no market at the destination. Even if it costs you nothing to move it, it's still useless if you don't have it, if you miss a trend, or if there's overabundance. Next, please. Capital is locked up in goods that are in transit. What's important are the amounts tied up in inventory with huge ships, but also the amount of time that can take to move cargo between systems. We talked about this also with just-in-time inventory. With Operation Lacoon, that threw another monkey wrench in. Think the Ever Given. All of a sudden, the easy way to move was blocked. Any questions? Let me see if anybody noticed anything in the comments I need to answer.
I've been answering a few things as I see them, but there really hasn't been anything recently, except we just got one now.
Okay. I do see Olam Drob. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I happen to be the captain of an emergency. Okay. I happen to be the captain of an imaginary sci-fi freighter myself. Come join TRMN and join the Merchant Marine. I've got plenty of jobs available. Okay. All right. So let's see. How was standardized shipping containers and robotic automated loading? I don't think we've really come up with a design for the Honorverse shipping and the cargo handling, other than we know there's something there. It's containerized. Probably something's pulling it off the ship. They have gravity control, so they can almost push it off to be grabbed.
Yeah, there's lots of tractor beams involved. We know that
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. It's a detail that Bu9 and I haven't really dealt into. Haven't gotten that granular.
Yeah, that rotary shipping container ship that I talked about some number of episodes ago was our take on that. Now that ended up not being an Honorverse ship because David had his own ideas about how container ships in the Honorverse work, and they involve there's like a spine that gets extended out of the ship, and the containers get hung on it. I don't quite understand exactly how it works. But our thought was this rotary shipping container idea, and but that's not canon in any, and so we're not even. We talked about it as being sort of a specialty thing in the Honorverse, and we kind of concluded the right answer is just to not include it at all. So,
yeah.
So we don't know exactly how all that stuff works.
Yeah. Oh, good. Somebody wants to read the Nathan Lowell books, hopefully.
Yes.
Yep.
They're very good. They're very
good. Yep. Let's see. Okay. What? Oh, she needs a link to TRMN.
Yes.
Yep.
So,
where's the best place to post it?
On
the YouTube tab.
Yeah, you can put it in the YouTube in the chat, or that works. That works. So, in the Honorverse, I don't know that there are really small containerized ships. We don't really see a whole lot of small freighters in the Honorverse, and I've never asked David as to whether they exist. In the real world, container ships started small. The initial container ships only had a handful of containers, and they were very specialized. But they've very quickly got to the point where they're just huge. And so I mean, and it seems to be the case that there's everything in the Honorverse seems to get very big very fast too. So somewhere maybe there's smaller ships, smaller containerized shipping in the Honorverse, but I haven't actually seen it. I don't know.
Yeah. Ships last a long.
The smallest freighter we see is like 1 million tons, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that's I'm considering that a small. Anything in system? Blackbird to Grayson. Cargo shuttles, maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking something that's fairly short. I mean, that's 5-6 hours, maybe.
Yeah, that's kind of a specialized thing, I think.
Yeah, you're talking the equivalent of tugboats.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the Traveler frame for moving huge cargo pods. Cedar Sanderson's looking at using something like that for her Tangier setting. I was talking with her last weekend about it. Something sort of similar to that, but with a cover. She's got a blog post about it recently. We don't know. We have some pictures for Honorverse cargo ships. We don't have details on the inside. They have tractor beams. They have artificial gravity. So they've got a lot of potential options.
Yeah, we don't know a whole lot about that.
Yep.
So, is that your last slide?
Yep.
My golly, it is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the entire issue of, David is fond of saying that shipping on a per mile basis is the cheapest in human history in the Honorverse. I don't think per mile basis is the right way to do it. Makes more sense to me. It's like nuclear reactors and electricity being too cheap to meter. Let's assume for a second that it is too cheap to meter, right? Does that mean it's free? No, it means that your calculation is different. It means your calculation is based upon the capital expense, how long you think it's going to be in operation, and how many customers you think you're going to have, right? And what you want your profit margin to be. The same thing is true with these freighters. If you, it's going to be how often do you think that they can move and what their operating expenses are, how many runs they can make. And if they're taking 6 weeks or 2 months per run, that's 6 trips per year, right? So, and if it's an 8 million ton freighter, it's still a huge capital expense. It's not like that's free. And when you sort of do the math on that, I think it's still going to be pretty damn expensive.
Yeah.
On a per ton basis, it might be cheap. On a per mile basis, it might be cheap. But, you move that, if you need 8 million tons of cargo to make it economical, okay, that's great, on a per ton basis, but you still have to shell out for 8 million tons of cargo.
Yeah. Yeah. That's also another reason that ships, when they're traveling a regular route, they're going to drop some cargo here, some cargo in one port, pick up some, drop some more in another. They may pick up the stuff they picked up in the first port, they may drop in the second just because they're going there.
Yeah.
But that gets into capitage laws, the equivalent of the Jones Act, is the requirements as to who's allowed to move cargo between planets.
Yeah, and we just don't have any insight on what's allowed and what isn't on all that stuff. So
yeah. Cargo shuttles from the ground. For smaller freighters like the Halley, they may actually pick it up from the ground themselves with permission. The bigger ships, maybe not. They may have it all already up in orbit so they can get in and out. Or maybe that's Mesa being inefficient.
I think you don't build, this is a universe where it's not unusual to have orbital facilities that are tens of kilometers long or larger.
Yeah.
That's the sort of place where I don't think you bring your cargoes up from the planet directly to the starship.
Not normally. I mean, they were bringing emergency replacement parts, which would make some sense.
Yeah, but I think your normal cargoes are probably, they go up whenever they go up, and they're warehoused in orbit. It's my guess. So
yeah,
but oh well. We should probably call it a night because this has been one of our longer ones, but this is a topic that's certainly worth spending some time on. Thank you very much, Peter, for being here. And like I said, we're going to have Peter come back at some point, and we're going to go through, we're going to talk a little bit about USNS ships and RoRos, and I've got literally 114 pictures of the USNS First Lieutenant Harry L. Martin, a ship that is now decommissioned. If I remember correctly, it's in the mothball fleet somewhere, right?
As of 2 months ago, it was in the mothball fleet in Texas. They were looking at towing it to Brownsville to be scrapped.
Okay. So it's
that was another one of those. Yeah, I'm signed off of that ship. but I still have to provide tech support.
Yeah.
I'm actually I was doing that on ships I hadn't been on for 15 years. But that was a friend of mine. She was on a ship I had been on a decade and a half earlier, and she was wondering, what is this? How do you fix this? What's the fast way of doing this? Because it stymied her for a little while. Oh, do this, try that.
We should also talk about Lash and what's the other one? Sea Barge?
Lash and Sea Barge were the of earlier form of a variant form of containerization that was tried.
Yeah,
it never really took off.
But they're very interesting, and they have some interesting implications for science fiction. And so Peter was involved on some ships that were basically one-offs. And they're very, very interesting one-offs. And so we should have a conversation about those as well at some point. So
yeah, there were, I think, six sea barges made, two different classes, and maybe 6 or 8 Lash ships in the U.S. plus some Russian ones.
Yeah.
One of the ships I was on as a cadet was the identity taken for a Russian ship during Red Storm Rising book for the invasion of Iceland.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because earlier in the comments, Wright made a Hunt for Red October reference, and apparently I got the points for catching it. So,
obviously I missed that because I was doing the presentation.
Yeah, he said I would like to have seen Montana, and I responded with Buckaroo because I recognized that he was quoting Sam Neill's character from Hunt for Red October. So, all right. So let's go ahead and call it a night, because to be honest, I'm ready to go to bed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can't blame you.
That was a fantastic talk, Peter. So you may have noticed, everybody, that my name was on the front of it, and that's because I had helped Peter with a few things here and there in putting it together, helping me with the organization and stuff like that. But I've never actually seen the talk. And so it was good to actually see the talk, and I look forward to continuing this discussion later. I'm not sure exactly when we're going to do that. I need to talk with Pat and find out what his schedule is for next week. And I gave you guys the warning that May is going to be a little bit dodgy. April's going to be better, but May is going to be a little bit dodgy because I'm going to be traveling a lot in May. Like, literally, I'm here in Dayton for only 3 days in May. Thankfully, my apartment complex has really good security, so I don't have to worry about being gone. But that having been said, thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and see you next time.